So let's very quickly review the principles of writing task 1 academic, simple line graphs. Again, I just want to reiterate that this is an important task. You cannot neglect it based on the mathematics of how these writing tasks are scored. You need to get 7 on both. It's not realistic to aim for over 7 on writing task 2 if you're already struggling to get band 7. Right, so you have to get 7 on both, and writing task 1 has a lot of its own challenges compared to writing task 2. The language it's got its own kind of unique language for describing data, for describing changes over time. So you need to spend just as much time on writing task 1 as you do on writing task 2. So here at the bottom of the screen, this is the rubric for writing task 1 academic, and it tells us exactly what we need to focus on.
Okay.
If you see here, so like the second point in task achievement in the first category says presents a clear overview of main trends, differences, and stages. So you have to start with a clear overview of main trends and differences. Overview is a very general description of the main patterns in the graph. You can put yourself in the shoes of the designer and just think, why did this person create this graph? Why did he choose this specific data set to visualize? What was he trying, or what was she trying to communicate? Okay, we visualize data because we want to point out some patterns, and they're easier to see compared to showing that data just in an Excel table. Right? Structurally, this general overview, because it's general, it belongs in the beginning. I see on a lot of websites examples of a general overview at the end. To me, that makes no sense because writing has to go from general to specific, or otherwise it's incredibly confusing. You don't start with details, you start with a general overview. And nowhere on the rubric does it say you need a conclusion. So there's no point in writing a concluding paragraph because you won't gain any score from it. It just gives you more opportunities to make mistakes, and you will lose points for those mistakes. So general overview goes at the top. This is very similar to the essay. The essay starts by paraphrasing the prompt, which is the context, and then you write your thesis, which can include the 2 supporting reasons for your position. In a very similar way, the general overview comes after you have paraphrased the prompt, and then you write the general overview, which just summarizes the main patterns that are visible in the graph. You do it without mentioning numbers, if possible. You just mention the general patterns that are there. You're going to put the details in the body paragraphs.
Okay.
What a lot of people neglect to do is that they neglect to put in data. Okay, so again, for task achievement, when you look at the the second point here, presents a clear overview of main trends, differences, or stages. So you absolutely have to give a general overview, and it's not the same in one sense as the thesis statement in the essay, because in the thesis statement in the essay, you can give a very simplistic thesis statement. You can say, I agree for the following reasons. That's not good enough for the general overview. The general overview on writing task 1 academic has to give a very brief summary of the actual information that you're going to talk about. And almost always it's like 2 patterns that you talk about in the line graphs or in bar graphs, the 2 big patterns.
If generally speaking, I have to mention about the pool, in our line graph now. I have to talk about post, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Yes, so that's one of them. We're first going to look at an example from IELTS, and it has 2 clear patterns. One is about radio, and one is about TV viewing patterns. And then the next line graph is something quite similar. The data is a little bit more complicated, but it's the exact same principle.
Okay.
Then you have to summarize the key features in 1 to 3 body paragraphs. You can't neglect any of the information. If they give you data, you have to talk about it. That doesn't mean you have to write down every single data point, but it means when these graphs, they go over 24 hours, because it's on a daily basis, it's viewing rates throughout the day from midnight to midnight. You can't just cherry pick and say, okay, I'm only going to talk about the usage patterns in the middle part of the day where most people are using this, or most people are listening to radio or watching TV. No, you have to talk about early in the day when there's not many people using it, and late in the day, again, when there's not many people using it necessarily. Another thing, forget about any background knowledge. If you have some expertise in this area and you know the reasons for some of these phenomena that the graphs describe, do not talk about them. It's considered irrelevant.
Okay.
So band 6 at the bottom here, it says, but details may be irrelevant, inappropriate, and inaccurate. So any of these things, irrelevant is considered background information. If it's not in the graph or in the diagram, don't talk about it. So that could be considered inappropriate. Or inaccurate is if you make any mistake and the examiner notices. So they're reading about 25 of these per hour, so they do miss mistakes for sure. But if they catch anything, then you will not get band 7 on task achievement, even if it's a minor mistake. The rubric is very black and white. Examiners get audited all the time, and if their supervisor notices that they overlooked an obvious mistake, then, I mean, that's in the report. That's in the examiner's report, and they don't like it when that happens. So they try their best to be as diligent and as thorough in their marking as possible. Occasionally they miss stuff, but that's not a good strategy. You also have to point out the patterns. You can't just list the data. You have to talk about patterns. The instructions always say, make comparisons where relevant.
Okay. Pattern, like I mentioned, it's if like gradually increasing or sharply decrease, something like this?
It could be, but usually it means a comparison between, so if we're talking about radio and TV rates, so it's talking about the actual differences in the patterns. So most people listen to the radio in the morning, whereas most people watch TV in the evening after work.
Okay.
Right? If you just listed all the radio data and then wrote a different paragraph just listing all the TV data, that's no good. That's just very robotic, and that's not what they're looking for. Okay.
Even if I start my second paragraph, like in contrast, the people who start watching TV after, like this is,
Yes, and then it would be making comparisons like at this time of day, so many people are on the radio, whereas in contrast, at the same time of day, very few people are watching TV.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's what you have to do for this one, but it's these kinds of comparisons. You don't have to have a lot of them. They just need to see that you're aware that, this is the comparison, or this is the pattern that the graph is trying to show you.
Okay.
Okay, and we've talked about the other issues. In terms of coherence and cohesion, you have to use transitions abundantly. And that's as simple as first, second, third, fourth, finally. In contrast, words like that explain to the reader how ideas are connected to each other. So some people say, well, if I use too many of these transitions, I'm insulting the reader's intelligence because from my writing, it's clear how these ideas fit together. Trust me, it's not clear. Just because something is clear in your mind does not mean that your reader or listener understands what you're talking about.
Okay.
Right? So you have to use this kind of very explicit, very obvious language. That's what they're looking for. Think of it this way. How can I make my writing more skimmable? So this is very different from stories. Very, very different. A best practice for nonfiction writing for information texts is to make them skimmable. You're not writing a work of art. It's not Shakespeare. Your audience is not sitting there with a glass of wine and a pipe and just enjoying your writing for its own sake. They're trying to get through it as quickly as possible just to extract the main points and then move on to the next thing that they have to read. So this goes for writing reports. This goes for writing these kinds of descriptions or information text. That's just the convention of how we write this kind of stuff. It's very different from writing stories. This is the basic structure. So first of all, first step is automatic, both with writing task 1 and writing task 2. This is for academic. Paraphrase the prompt. The prompt is the most general description of the data. So writing goes from general to specific. Then you write a general overview and don't include specific data in the general overview. You save that for the body paragraphs. Whether this is for IELTS or whether this is in real life, you're doing a presentation, it's overwhelming for the audience to start off with data in your intro. They need a warm-up. They need like this broad context of how they're going to fit this in. So I'm going to talk about this pattern, and I'm going to talk about this pattern. And then when you get to those patterns specifically, then you start with the data, and the audience is already prepared for that. And of course, people always ask how many body paragraphs. It can be 1 body paragraph, it can be 3 body paragraphs as appropriate. For this task, it is okay to have short paragraphs, like really short ones. That's not good. That's really not good for the essay. For the body paragraphs, you want 2 big chunky paragraphs there, but here short ones are okay. And the pattern's very basic. Main pattern described in general terms. Always provide supporting evidence. Some people neglect to do this, and they kind of get carried away with describing the patterns, but don't support their descriptions with actual data from the graph. It's just like writing a report. First you give like the overview of the data, then you give the actual data to show that your general idea makes sense. Right? And you can end paragraphs just by talking about what is the point of this data. And again, this is where you're making a comparison. If you haven't done so already, you can put the comparison in at the very end. So a statement like, this is in stark contrast to how people watch TV, comma, which is primarily in the evenings. Just something as simple as that is enough. Watch out for referencing. If you're talking about people, don't change to he. If you describe the data, like these results show that blah, 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 and then you switch to it, that's no good because these results needs to be they.
Okay.
So if you make that kind of mistake, if you look at the band 6, the final point here, it says may not always use referencing clearly or appropriately. That's what it's talking about. So referencing is things like pronouns. Referencing also means that the first time you mention an idea in a paragraph, use the full name of the concept or of the phenomenon that you're describing. You don't want to start a paragraph by saying it, because that immediately confuses the audience, because then they have to figure out what does it refer to. So the first time, just use the full phrase, the full term to describe the full phenomenon, and then you can switch to an appropriate pronoun. this, okay, so it arranges information and ideas coherently, and there's a clear overall progression. What this also means is that in the general overview, if you say this graph shows us X and Y, right away that means your first body paragraph is going to be about X and your second body paragraph is going to be about Y. Don't ever flip those around. It's just needlessly confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is supposed to have a very predictable structure. Again, it's not like fiction writing, murder mysteries where you find out at the end what the point was or who the killer was. Here, you give the big idea at the beginning, and then later you provide the supporting details. Very much like a news story. You know, they give everything away in the headline.
Mm-hmm.
The headline tells you everything. Then you've got a subheading that gives you like the second main idea or the main supporting point. And then in the first one or two body paragraphs, you've got like 80 to 90% of the story. And the rest of the paragraphs just give supporting details, like an interview with witnesses, interview with police officers, background information on the location, for example. Small details that most people will not ever read.
Mm-hmm.
Lexical resource. For Band 7, you can only have occasional errors that have zero impact on communication. If any of your errors cause confusion, it's not Band 7 anymore. Same thing with grammar. You can have a few grammar mistakes, but if your grammar mistakes cause confusion, it's not Band 7 anymore.
Okay.
If it's a little bit confusing, you see here grammatical range and accuracy, it's the fourth column, makes some errors in grammar and punctuation. I'm looking at Band 6, but they rarely reduce communication. Rarely reduce means the same thing as sometimes reduce.
Mm-hmm.
So anything causes confusion, it's a Band 6 in grammar. That's what makes getting to Band 7 so hard. And that's the rule of thumb that examiners use. If it causes any confusion in any of the points, task achievement, coherence, cohesion, vocab, grammar, it's not Band 7. So the rule that you have to follow is you have to read your work out loud. Let your ears tell you if anything sounds awkward.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, you have to trust your ears and you have to trust your gut. Don't question it because you don't have time. Just say, my ears are telling me this doesn't sound right. Don't overanalyze it. Just say, okay, what simpler language that I'm confident about could I replace this with? So the little rhyme we have is, if in doubt, leave it out. And replace it with a simpler construction. You're not trying to impress anyone with vocab. You don't need to use any big words in this. You just need to use appropriate and accurate language.
Okay.
They don't have a list of words or anything. They don't have a specific list of grammatical structures that they're looking for. They want you to use what is appropriate in that case. The only thing I will say is for grammatical range and accuracy, you should always use passive voice a few times. And the complex sentences, that's something we work on throughout the course. So as you build your range of complex sentences, that's going to happen naturally.
Actually, I have a problem with the active and passive participle. Yesterday, I started reading from the website, but I feel a little bit confused when I have to use like ing, like in the active, and I would use for the passive ed, right? Or
yes.
but actually, I couldn't differentiate when I have to use it. Like,
okay, so let's use this example. You would say the exciting performer, and you would say the excited crowd. Like, let's say you go to a concert. The performer is really exciting. The performer causes the excitement.
For the crowd.
Right. And the crowd, it's not the exciting crowd, it's the excited crowd, because they are the recipient or the experiencer of the action.
Mm.
So the experiencer is the passive. The cause of the experience is the active voice.
Yeah. Actually, I read this is on the website yesterday, and I totally understand that. But after I start try to do same thing with the other sentences out, I feel confused. I cannot decide if I use ing or ed, because
Okay.
sometimes the word it came after, not like it before.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we can talk about that on Saturday, because on Saturday we're going to do a review of all the grammatical constructions we talked about on Monday, and participles are going to come up.
Okay.
So at that point we can discuss them. We can do a whole bunch of examples.
I have also one question regarding the colon and semicolon.
Mm-hmm.
I read in the website, when I use semicolon, I can use it before to put however or start new sentences.
Mm-hmm.
Is it this is useful for task two?
For
It's
all
easy
of them, it's a very easy way to add variety to your writing.
because always I have a problem to connect a lot of sentences together, or
Yep. So let me give you a very simple way of using it.
mm-hmm.
There's a whole list there of conjunctive adverbs.
Okay.
So conjunctive adverbs are those words that very often appear in the middle of a semicolon sentence. So like you said, you'd have a sentence, an independent clause, semicolon, however, comma, another independent clause. So however is that joining word, but these joining words are called conjunctive adverbs. Got like however, furthermore, moreover, on the other hand, as well. There's that whole list there. If you're using one of those words in the middle of a paragraph, not the beginning of a paragraph, but in the middle of a paragraph, that's an opportunity for you to use semicolon, however, comma. If you've got a sentence, like a compound sentence with but in the middle, instead of using but, you can use semicolon, however, comma. And that's all it is. The only thing you need to remember is it's got to be an independent clause. It's got to be an independent clause, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma. That's the whole pattern.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so the main things that I'm going to keep stressing, though, the main grammar issues are subject-verb agreement, fragments, and run-on sentences. Those are the big ones we have to get out of the way first. Because if you have a whole bunch of these, that's not even band 6, that's band 5 on grammar. If you have frequent structural issues with your sentences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sentence fragment, that's mean the sentence is not given about meaning, or
It's like, so if an independent clause is, it's cold, period, that's fine. But if you write because it's cold, period, that's a fragment. It means it doesn't mean anything on its own. It requires an independent clause for it to mean anything. If you said, although he is sick, period. Well, that's half an idea, right? Although he's sick, well, so what? Although he's sick, comma, he still went to work. That's what it would have to be. But if you just put, although he's sick, period, that's a fragment.
okay.
Or if you write like, which means that he's healthy, period. Which means that he's healthy, period. So that's a dependent clause that needs to be attached to an independent clause. So just by itself, it has no meaning. And probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, when I see a sentence fragment, it's a comma splice. And a comma splice, that's a run-on. 8 or 9 times out of 10, when I see a fragment, the way to fix it is to simply attach it to either the sentence before or the sentence after.
Okay.
Like it belongs together with one of those two. Sorry, run-on sentence, the most common is a comma splice. So run-on sentence just means that you've got a sentence, so like two independent clauses, and then you've separated them with a comma. So you're not allowed to do that. You got to use
put adjective conjunction.
Well, there's a number of ways to fix it. The easiest way is just to put a period between them, or you can use a coordinating conjunction, so soyban, so, or, yet, but, and, nor. Or you can transform one of them into a dependent clause, like a subordinate clause or a relative clause. Or, like you said, you can use a semicolon.
Okay.
Just that's one of the most common errors, is to separate two sentences with a comma, which we're not allowed to do.
Yeah, I think I did this a lot.
Yeah, so I'll keep pointing it out. All of this is about habits. It's about pattern recognition. I'm always amazed by the similarities between athletics and writing. So if you're a golfer, I use this example a lot because I know a lot of golfers, and you're not happy with your game, and you hire a coach. This coach is going to break down your game into the specific aspects, like how you stand, how you twist your body, how you hold the club, where you're looking, how you shift your weight, like what your focus is on, maybe even your breathing. The coach is going to break down your game into all those sub-skills. You're going to work on those sub-skills and then build them back up into a fluent movement. But it takes a while for that to stick, because you've got all this muscle memory that you've been moving.
Automatically, you do same mistake.
Yeah, and you've been doing that same mistake for years, and your brain is just going to keep producing that mistake. So the first step is to recognize that it's a mistake, and your brain is still going to want to do it, but you're going to have to, you catch yourself, stop, do the correct thing, and it's only after a while that your brain is going to start automatically doing what you want it to do.
New setup.
Yeah, new habits, a new set of habits. So that's the reason why grammar, like a small percentage, is actually understanding the rules, and the big percentage is just apply, and have someone point out to you that you're making those mistakes. This is why nobody gets this very quickly. Every single student I've had has been doing grammar worksheets for like a decade, if not longer. And the grammar still has so many mistakes. That's because they haven't applied it enough, and someone has not pointed out to them when they're making a mistake. So these mistakes became like fossilized in their brain. And it takes, when there's a lot of inertia, it takes more energy to stop making those mistakes. And this is, a lot of people get frustrated that I keep pointing out, well, you're still making the same mistake. You're still making the same mistake. You're still making the same mistake. The fact is it'll take more and more repetitions until you finally stop doing that and start doing things properly. I can't stress enough how important it is to use your ears. These are two different language centers, and as you've seen maybe a few times, when I point out people's mistakes and they just read that sentence out loud to themselves a few times, it's like magic. The right word pops into their head. And then you're like, how did you know that was the right answer? And they're like, I have no idea, it just sounded right. Okay, well, that's why you have to trust your ears.
Okay.
So let's look at this one. This is from IELTS. The graph below shows radio and TV audiences throughout the day in 1992. Okay, and again, it says summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features, which just means they don't want you to say, at 6 a.m., this happened. At 8 a.m., it was like this. At 10 a.m., it was like, nobody wants to read that. That's awful, right? But you need to say, like, during the morning period, early morning, early afternoon, mid-afternoon, late evening. You have to chop it up into meaningful chunks of time. And you have to make comparisons where relevant. So we're talking here about radio and TV audiences. And just from looking at it, what is the big obvious pattern?
Okay.
Right, so just as you look at this graph, what's the big pattern that jumps out?
The elephant in the graph, I think the television, watching television reached a peak at 8 p.m.
8 a.m., that's the morning.
8 p.m.
8 a.m.
This is a radio. This is a radio.
That's the radio audience, yeah.
Yeah. At 8 a.m. In contrast, at the watching television at 8 p.m.
Yep.
The peak of number of people watch the television at 8 p.m.
Yes. The other thing that's obvious just from looking at it is that the area under the TV graph is much bigger. Like, people watch more TV for longer, right?
Okay, I can say the watching television is most popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's roughly, look at 45% of the population is watching TV.
Especially at even.
Yes. Whereas radio audience never even reaches 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And then it declines throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, hardly anyone is watching TV in the morning.
Okay.
All right, can you read this? Can you read from here?
Yeah. The line graph presents the percentage of the UK population over 4 years old that listened to the radio or watched TV over a 24-hour period from October to December in 1992. From an overall perspective, it can clearly be seen that although the radio was more popular than the TV in the morning, the TV was more popular in the afternoon and evening. The TV audience was also far higher than that of the radio.
Okay, and before you continue, let's have a look at this introduction. So first sentence, the line graph presents the percentage of the UK population over 4 years old that listened to the radio or watched TV over a 24-hour period from October to December in 1992. Where did the author find this information?
From actually over the 24-hour period from the graph.
Mm-hmm.
But from the October till December, in the UK from October till December from the prompt. But just now I noticed this is 4 years in the horizontal line of the paragraph. I didn't notice that before.
Yeah, so that's
vertical line, I mean.
Yeah, so that's called the y-axis, and then the horizontal would be the x-axis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're finding this information from
prompt.
This. The graph shows this, and then the graphs often have a title, and then you can also look at the y-axis and x-axis labels. So this is like a fairly detailed context description. Okay, so this
I
is
think
what
if
it.
I wrote this one, I will not write the over 4 years old because I didn't notice that from the beginning.
So again, so that's habit forming. When you do enough of these, and when you see enough good examples, you start to look more carefully at these graphs. Like your brain starts to go, okay, I'm going to look for the information in the prompt that they wrote down. Next, I got to look at the heading, and then I got to look at the axes to see what the labels on the two y and x axes are. And that's where you're going to find your information for writing the prompt paraphrase.
Okay.
You just have to get used to searching in these spots for all the info that you need.
Okay.
Then, general overview begins with a phrase like this. From an overall perspective, generally speaking, in general terms. This is one of these abundant transitions that you need to put in. It signals to the reader, in this case the examiner, this is the general overview. It's right on the rubric. It's got to be here.
Mm-hmm.
It can clearly be seen that. Just memorize this phrase. First of all, it includes the general overview intro, but it also includes an example of passive voice.
Okay.
It can clearly be seen. That's passive voice. They want to see that you can use passive voice. Just memorize this. You can always use this line, basically for any graph.
Okay.
Okay, here's the big pattern. Although the radio was more popular than TV in the morning, the TV was more popular in the afternoon and evening, and the TV audience was also far higher than that of the radio.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, the general overview happens to be 2 sentences. Often it's 1 sentence, doesn't matter. As long as you capture just the main ideas. Notice there's no data in here. He in this case, it was a he didn't bother writing about the 30% radio audience in the beginning or the 50% TV audience. That's too much detail for the intro.
Mm-hmm. But
Okay.
I saw him in the introduction. He put a comparison between the both views or both both people saying and watching TV and radio audience. That's mean no need to put another comparison in the body of the paragraph. It's enough.
Well, then you go into details.
Mm-hmm. If there is any comparison in the details, I have to put it again in the paragraph.
Well, that's an easy way to do it. Remember, we have this expression, say what you're going to say it, say what you said. So for presentations, that's true. For essays, that's true. For this one, because there's no conclusion, say what you're going to say and then say it. This kind of repetition helps the audience to remember. Remember, information texts are there to educate your audience. You're trying to teach them something, you're trying to show them something. And people don't remember stuff. People don't know why they're reading what you wrote. You have to keep reminding them why they are reading what they're reading.
Mm-hmm.
So you tell them what you're going to talk about. And then in the body paragraphs, you tell them in greater detail. So some repetition is just good writing, because in this kind of text, your job is to basically educate your audience.
I will prepare the audience and from the introduction about the general idea, then I will I will say all the details inside the paragraph.
Yeah, and in the introduction and the general overview, you're basically preparing their mind for how you're going to deliver the information. So if you say it can be clearly seen that although the radio is more popular than TV in the morning, and TV is more popular in the afternoon and evening, so if I see something like this, or if I hear something like this, I expect you to talk about the radio first, and I expect you to talk about TV second. And if you flip that around on me, it's confusing. And this is what the author did. He first talked about the radio. Okay, so go ahead, this body paragraph.
Okay. At 6 a.m., 8% of population were radio listener, and this rapidly climbed to just under 30% by around 9 a.m. The highest percentage that radio listener reached, I feel this like, okay. From here, so this number steadily declined and reached a low of approximately 1% higher than the of the radio.
So it's reached a low of approximately 1% at 2 a.m. So notice in this case, the body paragraph about radio is significantly shorter than the body paragraph about TV. The reason is that the radio pattern is really straightforward. It goes up really quickly and then declines steadily throughout the day. There's not a lot to talk about.
I have one question here. This is like in the second sentences. They wrote, this is rapidly climbed to just under 30% by around 9 a.m. Is it right to put just a comma that highest percentage of the radio listener reach? Oh, yeah, because this is like dependent clause, right?
We're going to talk about this. You mean the highest?
Yeah, okay. I feel like it wasn't like, I feel this is like.
Okay, I'm really glad you asked that. That's a structure we didn't cover in our last class. In terms of a grammar curriculum, this is considered a very advanced structure, but at the same time, it's just stupid easy in terms of how to do it. Okay, it's ridiculously easy. This structure is called an appositive.
Okay.
It's got a funny pronunciation. It's like it starts with a sound, appositive, and it basically has no grammar. It's just a noun or a noun phrase or a noun clause, which comes after. It could be another noun, or it could be after an entire sentence. So the simplest version of this, your friend Frank needs to see you. Okay, so Frank is exactly the same as your friend.
Well, yeah, like now.
Right, and you don't need to say your friend who is Frank. No. Just your friend Frank needs to see you. And in some cases you won't use commas, but in general, it's going to be separated by commas. So the cool thing is, there's basically no grammar. It's just a big noun.
Okay.
This is a really flexible, but very easy structure to learn. Okay. Another thing I want to point out too is that it says just under. Don't worry about being super precise. You don't need to like get out a ruler or something or try and measure accurately where this peak is. Is it 27? Is it 28? Just say just under 30%. by around 9 a.m.
Around. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So words like roughly, just about, just under, just over, around, anytime you're uncertain whether something is exactly at some point, just use one of those words and you're completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so here you have approximately 1% at 2 a.m.
Okay.
All right, and our last paragraph, go ahead.
Okay. Before the last, this is from here though. This is just also.
Oh, from here, oh, it's pronounced though. From here, though.
From here though.
Though means however.
Okay. Okay. Television viewers, on the other hand, a very different pattern.
And this is a very nice introduction. Again, it's very vague, and that's on purpose. You don't want to overwhelm people with tons of information in the beginning. He chose to just give a very general intro. Okay.
At 6 a.m., the percentage of population that was watching TV was around 0% and steady below 8% until midday.
Yep, stayed below.
Stayed below 8% until midday. From here, though, it started the race quickly, and by 1 p.m. had overtaken the percentage of the population listening to the radio at 15%. From it shot up to just under 50% by 8 p.m. The highest figure in the graph. Okay, again the same. Okay, from 10 p.m. TV viewer declined rapidly until around 3 a.m. when only 2% of population were watching TV. After this, from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., both the TV and radio had an audience of around 2 to 4%.
Okay.
Okay.
So here, in terms of making relevant comparisons, we've got stuff like...
I think this is like a, very good example, because before when I start writing, I feel this is like weird thing to put like comma between the both thing, but here I feel like something different.
Yeah, this is very well written. This person is a very good writer. So here we've got another example of what do you remember what this is called?
Yeah, like a positive.
Yeah,
A positive.
if you want, you can pronounce it a positive. It's pronounced a positive, but it's a kind of awkward pronunciation. Yes, so here's another example of an appositive, and again, the grammar is stupid easy. The highest figure in the graph. There's no grammar. It's just there's no verb in here. It's just a noun phrase. That's all it is. This is also the meaningful comparison, right? The highest figure in the graph shows that you're making comparisons. So that's why you put it in. This too, by 1 p.m., it had overtaken the percentage of the population listening to the radio at 15%. That's another comparison that he put in.
Hello.
So it's not just first I'm going to talk about the radio, then I'm going to talk about TV. No, you have to make some kind of comparisons.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So in just a few spots, the author has made these kinds of comparisons. Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've gone over all of these points here. The only other point I wanted to show you was a few days ago, we talked about complex sentences, and we talked about, you know, which sentences are considered more or less complex. So it basically goes, you know, you got simple sentences, then you've got compound sentences, then you've got complex sentences. And the most common type of complex sentence is one with a subordinate clause. Like, because it's cold, comma, I wore a sweater. So because it's cold is a subordinate clause. And it's very easy to put a subordinate clause at the beginning of a sentence or at the end. What's more complicated is putting the subordinate clause in the center of a sentence. So right here, you've got a subordinate clause in the middle of a sentence. Okay, and that is a stylistic choice. We can take this, I'm going to take it out and put it at the beginning. Although the radio is more popular than TV in the morning, we can also take it out and put it at the end.
Oh, yeah, because that when I read, I feel a little bit confused. I feel like should put this is in front of that.
Yeah, and that's the easy way to do it, and this is how most people learn how to do it. And then all of their sentences forever, they have the subordinate clause either at the beginning or sometimes at the end. In many, many cases, you can put it right in the middle, just to, there's no logical reason here. There's a lot of flexibility in how you structure your sentences. What is nice about flexibility is using a variety of sentences is better writing, because if you have the same structures repeatedly, the writing becomes quite boring. It's the reason that road designers, when they're making highways, they try to avoid highways that are too straight for too long a period of time, and they introduce curves just basically arbitrarily. They introduce curves so that you don't fall asleep at the wheel of your car. So if you wrote everything using only a very few limited number of structures, it's super boring to read. So this is the kind of thing that jumps out when you don't do it. When you have a low variety of sentence structures, that is noticeable. When you've got a big variety of sentence structures, it's not really noticeable.
Like a break a routine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So we've covered all the questions in the analysis. And so the assignment was for this graph, which essentially is the same thing. It's just a bit more complicated. So these are message viewing rates by time of day, and it compares business LinkedIn emails with business Facebook posts. And just from a quick glance at this, what's the general pattern that you notice?
Okay. The general pattern, the business LinkedIn email, more viewing. The message is more viewing at afternoon time and evening time.
The business one?
the business LinkedIn email.
At what time do the business LinkedIn emails start to decline in terms of their viewing rates?
Early in the morning or at the beginning of the day at 12 a.m. and the end of the day after 6 p.m. start decline.
Whoa. Okay. So here, the first peak that we see is at
11.
around 11 a.m. That's the first peak. Then it dips down. I guess people are just doing some more work until lunchtime. And then when they get back after lunch, from about 2 o'clock to roughly 4 o'clock, that's the major peak when people are checking LinkedIn. And then it drops off like crazy and keeps dropping very rapidly until 6 p.m. So I wouldn't talk about this during the graph, but essentially LinkedIn is something that look at while you're at work, right? There might be relevant information related to business, and then people tend to ignore it in the evening. But what's the Facebook pattern? The business Facebook post pattern for it's the red line.
Okay, the business Facebook post we start the first peak at 11, around 11 a.m. But after that, it start decline gradually to reach less than 10% at noon. Or I can say it's like fluctuated between noon. Start gradually.
Noon seems to be like just over 10%.
Oh yeah, over 10, not like less than. Yeah.
And then maybe it's got like this
increasing again at 1 p.m. I'm not sure if I can say here like fluctuated between up and down, but because it's like
so you would say it fluctuated. So around noon, it reaches this low, and then it fluctuates between about 12 and 17%, or between, you can say 10 and 20% between noon and 3 o'clock.
Okay. After that, it starts increasing again, gradually increasing to reach a peak.
No, rapidly increasing. See, gradual increase would be the first part of the line, like from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's a slow, gradual increase, but from 3 to 5 is a rapid increase.
5, it sharply increase. Rapidly increase, okay. Rapidly increase to reach second peak at around 5 p.m. To reach 50%.
It's probably a little over. I'd say like 55.
Yeah.
It seems to be between the 50 and 60.
Yeah, the highest peak. Start decreasing again, deeply decreased, or I can say again like rapidly decreased, till and stayed till rapidly decreased from the 5 p.m. till 11. Then steadily stay at the same level, less than 10%, till 8 p.m. Then start increasing again to reach around 50% at 11.
Good, and yeah, use language like around 11. You don't need to say precisely 11.
Yeah, around 11, then suddenly drop to less than 10% by midnight.
Very nice.
At midnight, sorry.
Yep. Something I would point out is in this peak before noon, I would say it has a similar pattern to LinkedIn early in the day before noon, but at a lower level. All right, so this is something that's worth mentioning.
Okay, I have to
And
make
then
a comparison between both, and this is relevant to this.
I would, yeah. And then, I mean, in terms of understanding why this isn't, and you're not going to talk about it in your graph, but from the Facebook, my guess is that people are looking at this stuff on their way out from work, maybe on their way home. And then here it drops down to like 5% around dinner time. And then when the kids are in bed, again, the smartphones come out and people are back on Facebook. Whereas they're just ignoring LinkedIn until the next day. So that's probably what's happening. But again, don't talk about that when you're actually doing your writing.
Yeah.
So I just want to point out a few mistakes that I saw with the way people do this. Precision of language is really important. So here, when someone says, in terms of, and this is a body paragraph, in terms of business LinkedIn emails, its share starts at just about 5% at 12 a.m. So we're not talking about business LinkedIn emails. We're talking about the percentage of emails that are opened. Right. So the devil is in the details. You have to be precise. Yeah.
Yeah, or message viewing. Okay.
This is a referencing issue. So its here is highlighted in red because this is emails. It's plural. So this needs to be their share. Right. And then the same error is continued throughout this paragraph.
Okay.
So that's, you have to be careful with referencing. Similar error here. Business LinkedIn email and business Facebook post rates are similar in the morning and start to fluctuate throughout the day. Rates of what? Right. The writer has not indicated rates of what. You need to say viewing rates, open rates, whatever you want to call it.
And this is overall, I have to put it upright in the introduction. Or
yeah.
If I put it down? This?
Yeah. Well, it needs to be general, but this is too general because it's not explaining precisely what you're talking about. So it's post rates would be like the rate of people actually posting things on LinkedIn or Facebook, but that's not what it is. This is specifically the rates of these things getting opened. Right, so the post rate is always going to be 100%. It's like when you send out emails, what percentage of those emails actually get opened? That's what we're talking about here. Yeah, people were asking about using BLE and BFP instead of business Facebook posts or instead of business LinkedIn emails. I wouldn't do that. These are not well-known acronyms. Technically, they're called initialisms, not acronyms, but they're not well-known, so don't use them. Just write out the full thing. And then switch to pronouns, they. There's no date in this graph. Whoops, sorry. There's no.
Like in the experience. Experience reached business linked email experienced marginal raise in the reach. And reach 15 of viewed message.
Right, so because there's no date, just assume that it's true all the time. It's generally true.
Like experiences.
Yeah, it has to be present simple. When time doesn't matter, when you're describing phenomena in general, like the sun rises in the east, the sun sets in the west, you just use present simple.
Okay, and I have to put experiences, a marginal raise, and reaching 15%.
Even simpler than that. Now note it's emails, so that's third person plural. It's got to be experience. They experience. It experiences, they experience. A marginal rise and reach. Just reach.
Without ed. Okay.
Right. This person wrote a summary paragraph. Don't do it. It's not anywhere in the marking criteria. You can't get any bonus points. And especially in such a short task, all that time that you spend writing a summary paragraph, you're better off spending that time on editing your work. You need to get to a point where you're able to complete this in like 15 minutes and then spend 5 minutes reading it out loud, like just quietly to yourself, but using your ears, engaging your auditory language center, and editing.
Okay.
You're going to catch lots of mistakes that way. Okay, and not only do you not get any points for putting in this additional summary paragraph at the end, again, you have all these extra opportunities for making mistakes, which will cost you marks. Okay, and in this case, this was the beginning sentence of a paragraph, and the person started their paragraph by saying the first group in this graph shows. So my comment is, this is a referencing issue. What is this first group? Right, just be very explicit. It's either LinkedIn or it's Facebook messages.
Okay.
So that's it for this one. Okay, any questions?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, so that's it. So I look forward to seeing your work tomorrow then.
I think I will I will edit all my work. The new thing I learned today, and because I feel I'm not happy about what I wrote.
You want to do it from scratch? Go for it.
Yeah, better. Because I didn't do any comparison between the two groups. This is a fair thing. And then I didn't mention like overviewing like what I did now. Just I go one by one. Because I put in my mind I have to put all the data. But now I will do it from the scratch if possible.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's not fixable. Sometimes it's better just to start over.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, I look forward to seeing your writing tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a good night. Bye.
Have a great night. Okay.